Namaskaram. Hi, Michael. Hi, Ernesto.
Namaskaram.
Hi.
Today, we're going to talk about verse 1 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. We're going to analyze this verse. So first, I'll read the verse, and then we can start with the discussion. The verse says like this: because we see the world, accepting one fundamental that has a power that becomes many is certainly the one best option. The picture of names and forms, the one who sees, the cohesive screen, and the pervading light, all these are he, who is oneself.
Though this is a very simple verse on the surface, there's a lot of underlying meaning and implication in this. This is the first verse of the main text of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu means 40 verses on what exists. So Uḷḷadu, what exists, implies what actually exists, what is real. But Bhagavan doesn't begin from what is real. He begins from the world, or rather from our perception of the world, because from there he works backwards to this world exists where it exists in our view. So the reality of the world cannot be more real than we are. So what is our reality? We who see the world are, as Bhagavan makes clear, for example, in the 4th verse, he says, if oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. So this world of names and forms, and God as a separate form, exist only in the view of ourselves when we take ourselves to be a form. We take ourselves to be a form only when we rise as ego. So the implication is that the world exists in the view of ego. So the first word in the verse is nāma. Nāma means we. In Tamil, there are 2 words for nāma, for we, sorry. There's nāma and nāṇḍal. The difference is nāma is the inclusive first person plural pronoun. If we say nāma, we're including the person or the people we are speaking to. But if we say nāṇḍal, we're talking about us excluding the person or people being talked to. So it's a very important difference between these two first person plural pronouns. So Bhagavan often uses nāma, not that he is saying that very many of us, but because he uses nāma as an inclusive form of the first person singular. That is, if he had said, because you see the world, he's excluding himself. If he says, because I see the world, he's excluding us. He says, because we see the world, he's talking in an inclusive manner. When he says we have to understand from a context whether he's referring to ourself as ego or ourself as we actually are. In some contexts, he uses we to refer to ourselves as we actually are. In some contexts, he uses it to refer to ourselves as ego. In this context, it's obviously ourself as ego, but it's only when we rise as ego that we see the world. So just like he uses we have to understand from a context whether it refers to ourselves as ego or ourselves as we actually are. Likewise, whenever he uses the word nān or yan, which means I, but we have to understand from a context whether it's referring to ego or to what we actually are. Likewise, there's another word he often uses in Tamil, tāṇā. Tāṇā means oneself. That can either refer to ourself as ego or ourself as we really are. We need to understand from a context. And sometimes he uses it in the same sentence to refer in one place to ourselves as ego and in another place to ourselves as we actually are. So we need to, when we read Bhagavan's verses, we need to read very carefully, and we need to understand the intended meaning, not just the surface meaning of the words. We need to understand the intended meaning, and we also need to understand the implications. So we can understand the intended meaning and the implications in the context of his teachings as a whole. So if we take just one verse like this, we need to understand the meaning of this verse, the significance of this verse in the context of his teachings as a whole. So as I say, here what he means by nāma is ourself as ego, because what sees the world of names and forms is only ourself as ego. And the fact that it's the world of names and forms he's referring to is very clear from the second sentence, where he described the world as nāmavuruc cittiramum. That means the picture of names and forms. That is, this world is a picture of names and forms. It's a picture composed of, as he makes clear in a later verse, in verse 6, it's a picture composed of 5 types of sense impression. That is, the world picture consists not only of visual, it's not only a visual picture, it's a picture with sound and smell and taste and tactile sensations. So this all together, the impressions of the 5 senses constitute the picture of the world, which consists of names and forms. So the first word of this verse is nāma, we. The second word is ulaham, which means the world. And the third is kāṇḍalāl, which literally means by seeing or because of seeing. But the whole thing together means because we see the world. As I said, these are the opening words of the main text of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu. So Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu is about what exists. But he begins by talking about what does not exist, about what just seems to exist. What seems to exist is the body and world. In whose view does it seem to exist? Only in the view of ourself as ego. In whose view does ego seem to exist? Only in its own view. In the view of ourself as we actually are, there is no ego, no body, no world. There is just pure being, pure awareness. So I'm explaining now a lot, but that is, if we start Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu just reading this verse, we'll be able to draw relatively little from it. When we read this verse in the context of all the other verses, then we are able to draw out much more meaning from it. So we're able to understand in the context of, if we've read all the other verses of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu and understood them, we understand the we who sees the world is ego. And this world exists only in the view of ego. So there's another reason why Bhagavan begins this verse with this clause, because we see the world. If we didn't see the world, there would be no problem, and therefore there would be no need for any spiritual teachings. Spiritual teachings are necessary because we have risen as ego, and it's the very nature of ego to perceive the world. That is, whenever we rise as ego, we're aware of ourselves as I am this body, and we're consequently aware of other things that constitute the world. So he's from this very first verse, he's talking about the problem we face. That is, he actually in Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, Bhagavan says relatively little about Uḻḷadu. The reason is, Uḻḷadu is what always exists. Not only does it always exist, it always shines. It is always clearly known. That is, that which is shining in us as I am, that is Uḻḷadu. That is what actually exists. Everything else is just an appearance. It's just a mental image. It has no existence independent of our view of it. So the Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu is given as a spiritual teaching. Because it's given as a spiritual teaching, the aim is to point us back to what actually exists, namely ourself. So he begins from our experience. Our experience is we seem to be a person and we seem to be seeing a world. This is the problem we face, because we know that a person means we experience ourselves as I am this body. And we all know embodied existence brings with it so many problems. That is, we have to go through the pain and discomfort of birth, and then of growing up, and then we spend our life running after so many objects of our desires. Some of them we get, some of them we don't get. Even those we get, they're all impermanent. We seem to have for a while, but sooner or later we're going to have to say goodbye to all these things when we die. And eventually we grow old, eventually we die, and in the course of the life we face so many other problems. We often face sickness, bodily pain, financial difficulties, relationship difficulties, social difficulties, so many different types of problems we all face in one form or another. So this embodied existence is full of problems. And the world is also full of problems. When we see the world, there are pandemics, there are wars, there are natural disasters. So this state of embodiment of existing as a small body in a big world is a very it's a problematic state. It's a state that is full of, that produces so many problems for us. All these exist only because we have risen as ego, and therefore we see the world. If we didn't see any world, that means we haven't risen as ego, because whenever we rise as ego, we see a world, whether in this waking state or in dream. The very nature of ego is firstly to always be aware of itself as I am this body, and consequently to be aware of a world, because the body is obviously a part of a world. So perception of the world is the very nature of ego. So all these problems arise because we've risen as ego. So Bhagavan begins with the most obvious symptom of our rising as ego. What is the most obvious symptom? We see a world. When we see a world, what does that imply? We see ourselves as a body, because it's only through the five senses of a body that we see a world. And whenever we see a world, we experience ourselves as if we were a body in that world. When we dream, the whole dream is our own mental fabrication. But we don't experience it as our mental fabric. It doesn't seem to us to be a mental fabrication so long as we're dreaming, because we experience ourselves as if we are a part of that dream, as if we are a body in that dream. So whenever we experience a world, we experience ourselves as a body in that world. This we can see from our own experience. So the most obvious effect, the most obvious effect of the most obvious sign that we have risen as ego is because we see a world. So that's why Bhagavan begins, because we see the world. And the order of words here is significant. Firstly, he begins with we. That is, the world exists in whose view? In our view. So he begins with we. Then he begins with, then comes the object, the world. And then comes, what is the means by which we know the world? He says here, because we see the world. Here, see, though it literally means see, we have to understand this is a metaphorical way of saying because we perceive the world. He's not just talking about visual perception, he's talking about perception through all the five senses. So that is, here we have what is called the triputi. All knowledge, all experience can be, of things other than ourselves, can be analyzed into three things. We have ourself as the perceiver. We have the object of our perception, and there also has to be a means of perception, a means of knowing. That is, you've got the knower, and what is known, and the means by which it is the object, the thing that is known is known. So there's the knower, the known, and the means of knowing. So all this triputi is contained in this clause. It begins with the knower, we, and what is known, the world, and what is the means by which we know it? Seeing. As I say, seeing here means perceiving. It refers to it, though it literally means seeing. It implies perceiving by the all or any of the five senses.
Or experiencing.
Experiencing, yes, exactly. So, though, as I say, on the surface, the verse seems to be very, very simple, but there's a lot of implication. Even in these first three words, we can, if we understand it in the context of Bhagavan's teaching, these first three words are extremely significant. So, this first three words, these form a clause, and it's a because clause. So this is a reason for something. What is it a reason for? That is what is said in the main clause. But the main clause is oppal orutalaiyē. That is the subject and the verb of the main clause. Oppal means accepting. Orutalaiyē, oru means one, tale means head, and the final suffix a is an intensifier. In this context, it means certainly. So this orutalaiyē can be, or has been by translators, it's been interpreted in various different ways. How I interpret it is the one best option. The reason I interpret it like that, what Bhagavan is saying, is talking about accepting in this context, is not the only way of viewing the world. There are so many different views of the world. Some people believe the world exists independent of our perception of it. So the world is there, and we are born into this world, and then we see the world. So the world, according to that view, the world exists independent of ourselves. That is not the view Bhagavan is teaching us here. So there are different ways of interpreting our experience of the world. Bhagavan is pointing out here what is the best option. As I say, oru means one, and tale means head. So it implies best. And one meaning of orutalaiyē in certain contexts, if someone is one-sided in a judgment, that is called orutalaiyē. That is but here, this is not the meaning Bhagavan means here. Bhagavan isn't saying, but accepting this is one-sided. He's saying that tale, as I say, literally means head. It can mean best. So the one best option is accepting this. Accepting what? That is the earlier part of the clause. Accepting or mudalai. Mudal means what is first or fundamental. So or mudalai, the suffix a is the accusative case ending. So or mudalai is the accusative case form of or mudal. Accusative case means it's the direct object. So we accept what? We accept one mudal. The mudal here means, in this context, I translate it as fundamental. Some people translated it as one first principle. It has much the same meaning. But mudal, as I say, it means first. So it means what is fundamental. So there's one fundamental, accepting one fundamental. This is the main thing. But what is the nature of this one fundamental? There's a relative clause. Nāṇā śatti uḻḷa. Ulla in this context means which has. The verb ul usually means to be, but in some contexts it can mean to have. So in this context, it means it's to have. So this one mudal, this one fundamental, it has a power. The Tamil word śatti it's a Tamil form of shakti. So one shakti, one power. And what is the nature of this one power? Nāṇā āṃ. Nāna means various or multiple, or so what is many? It means nāna is nāna, and means which is or which becomes. So there's in this context it means which becomes many. So this one fundamental has a power which becomes many. So this is what Bhagavan says is the one best option, accepting that there's one power. And one fundamental, and that this one fundamental has a power to become many. That implies to be seen as many. That is, what we see as all this multiplicity is nothing but that power. And that power is nothing but the one fundamental. To understand what Bhagavan means by power here, again, it's always good to consider these things in the light of other teachings. The power he's referring to here is the same power that he refers to in nāna, at the beginning of the 4th paragraph. He says, Manam embadu atmasarupatilulla or Adiseya Shakti. Manamembadu means what is called the mind. Atma Swarupa means, Atma means oneself. Swarupa means, literally it means own form, but it's a term that is used to mean the nature or the real nature. So Atma Swarupa means the real nature of ourself. In other words, Atma Swarupa means what we actually are. And as Bhagavan says in later on in the same work, in the first sentence of the 7th paragraph, he says, Yathatamai uḻḷadu atmasarupamandre. What actually exists is only atmasarupa. So what he refers to in this first verse of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu as all mudal, one fundamental, that is what actually exists, which is atmasarupa. So in this atmasarupa, which is the one fundamental, there is an or means one, Adiseya means extraordinary or wonderful, Shakti power. What is that one power? It is what is called the mind. So we can infer from this sentence, if we read it along with the first verse of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, but what Bhagavan implies in the first verse of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, the one mudal that he's referring to is Atmasarupa, our own real nature, and the power that this one fundamental has is mind. In Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, in nāna, he says, as I say, what is called mind is an Adiseya Shakti that exists in Atmasarupa. So it's not Atmasarupa itself, but it exists in Atmasarupa. Its relationship to Atmasarupa is also made clear by Bhagavan in the first 2 sentences of the 6th verse of Arunachala Ashtakam. What he says in the first sentence is, Undu oru porul ariboli ullamei ni. That means he's addressing Arunachala. So what he means by ni, you, is Arunachala. So what he says in this sentence, there is only one substance, one real substance, one thing that actually exists. That is, porul implies a substance in the sense of what actually exists. So there is only one substance, you, the heart, the light of awareness. So the one thing that actually exists is Arunachala, which is the heart, which is the light of awareness. That is that light of awareness that always shines in our heart as I am is the heart, and that is Arunachala, and that is that is the oppal, the one substance, the one reality, the one thing that actually exists, and that is Arunachala. So this is what, in the first sentence, he's describing what actually exists. So there is one substance, you, the heart, the light of awareness. Then in the second sentence, he says, Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu ila Adisaya Śatti. Uڵḷadu means exists. Unil in you. Uڵḷadu ila, which is not means which is not other. That's an adjective to Adisaya Śatti. That is, in you exists an extraordinary power which is not other. Which is not other here implies it's not other than you. So this power that exists in the one mudal, it exists in that one mudal, and it's not other than the one mudal. But the one mudal, that power is nothing other than the one mudal, but the one mudal is not that power. This is just like if we see a rope and mistake it to be a snake, we are seeing the snake in the rope. The snake is nothing but the rope, but the rope is not a snake. Likewise, this Śatti, this power, is not other than is nothing other than the one fundamental, but the one fundamental is not that power. So we need to understand that the relationship between the power and the fundamental whose power it is like the relationship between the snake and the rope.
It's like, for example, Michael, if you said the energy, of this power is the substance, is our real nature, but the image, of the form of this power acting in the world is the snake. No?
We could say it like that, but here Bhagavan is actually distinguishing because the power he's referring to here, as I said, it is mind, as he implies in the fourth in the first sentence of the fourth paragraph of nāṇā, which I just read to. He said, what is called the mind is a wonderful power that exists in Atmasvarupa. So the mind is nothing other than Atmasvarupa, but Atmasvarupa is not the mind. That is, what actually exists is only Atmasvarupa. It now appears in the form of mind.
Yes.
So we need, here Bhagavan is distinguishing the power from the one fundamental whose power it is. So the one fundamental exists independent of the power, but the power does not exist independent of the one fundamental. The snake cannot exist without the rope, but the rope exists very well without the snake, because the snake is just a false appearance. Likewise, this power that we call mind or maya is just an appearance. It's not real. What is real is only the one fundamental. But this power cannot be anything other than that one fundamental, because what actually exists is only that one fundamental. As he said in the seventh paragraph of nāṇā, what actually exists is only Atmasvarupa. And as he says in that first sentence of Arunachala Ashtakam, there is only one substance, you, the heart, the light of awareness. That is, here he's talking about the one thing that actually exists. It's only this one substance, which is what is called Arunachala, which is the heart, which means it's the very center of ourself, and it is the light of awareness. It is that light of awareness. What awareness? That fundamental awareness I am. So that is what he's talking about. That fundamental awareness I am, what we are always aware of as I am, that is the one, the oppal, the one real substance. That is the vōrmudalai, the one fundamental. That is Atmasvarupa. So that is, if we think deeply about Bhagavan's teachings and see all the connections, each thing gives us more clarity. Each aspect of his teaching gives us more clarity to understand the other aspect. So we couldn't understand this first sentence in so much depth if we didn't connect it with the first sentence of the fourth paragraph of nāṇā, and with which we have to connect with the first sentence of the seventh paragraph of nāṇā, and also with this first two sentences of verse 6 of Aruṇācāśṭakam. When we take all of these together, then the meaning, what Bhagavan is implying in this first verse of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu becomes more clear. So what he's saying here is there's one fundamental. He doesn't say in this first sentence what that one fundamental is, but we have to understand from inference, referring to other things, that one fundamental is ourself, Atmasvarupa, what we actually are, our own real nature, that one fundamental. Our own real nature has a power. That power, as he says in verse 6 of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, it exists in us, and it's not other than us. But we are not that power. That power depends on us for its seeming existence. We don't depend on it. So the power Bhagavan is talking about here is Maya, or mind. That is the term Bhagavan often made it clear, but Maya is nothing but the mind. And the mind in this context means ego.
Can we say, Michael, that Shakti is the dynamic external power of what we really are?
Yes, we can say that, but that it's dynamic. Dynamic means active. But what is the first action? The first activity is our rising as ego. So that all activity arises along with the rising of ego. So the first rising is the rising of ourself as ego. So this Shakti is that ego which rises, and from it all other actions, all other activities, all happenings, all events, all karmas, all originate from that one power, which is ego, mind or ego. In the fourth paragraph of nāṇā, just to understand it a little more deeply, after saying what is called mind is a wonderful power in Atmasvarupa, he then says in the next sentence, Adu sakala ninevūgalayum totru bikindradu. That means it causes all thoughts to appear. So from this, we have to understand what he means by mind here in this context is the first thought, namely ego. So often when Bhagavan is talking about mind, in many, many contexts, he's using the mind as a synonym for ego, because what the mind essentially is ego. But in other contexts, mind can be used in a broader sense to include all thoughts. But of all thoughts, the one essential thought is the first thought, I. That first thought, I, is what is called ego. So the difference between this first thought, I, and all other thoughts are objects. The first thought, I, is the subject. So all other thoughts exist only in the view of the first thought, I. So all other thoughts depend on the first thought, I. So in this verse, nām ulaham kāṇḍalāl, the first clause, nām, we there, refers to ego, this first thought, I. Ulaham means all the other thoughts. That is, the world is nothing but thoughts, as he also says in this fourth paragraph. So everything, all objects constitute the world. And there seem to be two worlds in our experience. There's a material world outside. It seems to be outside because it's outside our body, or our body is inside it. And there's a seemingly internal world of thoughts and feelings and perceptions and likes and dislikes and memories and workings of the intellect. This internal world and that external world, there seem to be two worlds, but actually, as Bhagavan also makes clear, what seems to us to be an external world is nothing but this internal world. That is, the world is nothing but, as he says in the sixth verse of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, the world is consists of the five kinds of sense. The world is nothing but the five kinds of sense impressions. Thereunto, nothing else. So, but what we see, what seems to us to be an external world, is actually internal. Internal in the sense it's all within the mind. So, so when Bhagavan talks about nāmulahaṅ, the word ulaham means, as I say, it means world. In this context, it means the totality of all objects, both the physical objects that seem to constitute a physical world and the mental objects, the thoughts and perceptions and memories and the workings of the intellect and the likes and dislikes and desires. These all together, they're all objects. So they all constitute the world. So we have two things. We've got a subject and we've got the object. In terms of Sankhya philosophy, you've got Purusha and you've got Prakriti. But Sankhya is a dualistic system, so they think that the Purusha exists independently and Prakriti exists independently. Whereas in Advaita, as Bhagavan teaches us, the Prakriti, everything that is seen, all the objects have no existence independent of the subject. It's only in the view of the subject that the objects seem to exist. That's why he says here, the best option is to accept. What we see now, when we see the world, we are seeing multiplicity. We're seeing a multiplicity of names and forms, or multiplicity of phenomena. So how to explain this appearance of phenomena? Is it true that many things exist? Do many things actually exist? We have no evidence that anything other than ourselves exists. Other things seem to exist. But in whose view do they seem to exist? They seem to exist only in our view. That's the significance of Bhagavan saying, nāmulahaṅ kāṇḍalāl. As I say, nām is a first person plural pronoun, but it's used here as an inclusive form of the first person singular pronoun I. So who sees this world? I do. In whose view does this world exist? In my view. So we've got one perceiver and many things perceived. So this is our experience. This nobody can deny. Whatever be your philosophy or your religion or your atheism or whatever, or science or whatever it is, we all have to accept in our experience, in the experience of each one of us, there is one experiencer and many things experienced. One perceiver, many things perceived.
In this distinguish or divide of the ego, we can say that the subject is aham vritti and the object is all the thoughts. All the
other vrittis. All other vrittis are objects. The first vrittis in effect just means thought. So the first vritti is the aham vritti, the thought I. So the thought I is the subject. All other thoughts are objects. So all objects are thoughts. So everything that is perceived by I is objects. Those objects are what constitute the world. And so, as I said, I is the subject, the world is the object, and kāṇḍalāl, the seeing, that is the means by which we know. How do we know this object? By perception, by the outside objects of the world, we see through their external sense organs. The external sense organs are the eyes, ears, nose, mouth or tongue, and the whole the skin of the body, or the whole body. But the whole body is a sense organ in the sense that it's all sensitive to touch. So through these five sense organs, we see the external world. And the internal world of thoughts and feelings, we see through the internal sense organ called mind.
But we can say that it all is internal, no? Because if how say it in the Zen, no? Our eyes don't see, our ears can't hear. It's an illusion.
These senses are just like windows. They're the windows through which we see things. But actually, if you look out the window, you see a world that seems to exist outside the window. But actually, in this case, as Bhagavan made clear, the seer of the world not only perceives the world, but also projects the world. That is, the world has no existence apart from our perception of it. If we consider in dream we see so many things. We see a whole world with trees and mountains and oceans and houses and cars and people and all these things. These all exist where? Only in our perception. So all these things we are projecting and perceiving. But projecting and perceiving are actually not two different things. Because where do we project all these things? Only in our own perception, in our own awareness. So the projecting of the world and the perception of the world are one and the same thing. In a dream, there aren't two things happening. First, I'm projecting the world, and then I'm seeing the world. No, the projection and the perception are one and the same thing.
And for example, in a dream, I feel that I smell a very cake, for example, no?
Yes.
But I don't see my nose, and I don't know anything about my nose smelling the cake. No?
Yes.
And the idea that now I have a sense through that is like a window through I can smell is an illusion too. It's a construction too.
Yeah, the whole thing is a mental construction. Like you say, the one thing we never see is our own eyes. We can see a reflection of our eyes if we look in a mirror, but we can never actually see our own eyes. But we don't need to see to know that we have eyes, because if we didn't have eyes, we couldn't see. But the ultimate eye, the eye that sees everything, is ego. Yes.
When ego, yesterday thinking about what you said about last verse 12. You said that, the question came to my mind that, so is ego aware of itself? Then I thought, well, ego is aware of itself as the body, as being a body. So, but ego, if ego were aware of itself, it could be, ego isn't nor can be aware of itself without the body. So it could be pure awareness.
Yes, that is, ego's awareness of itself is a very strange thing, because we are aware of ourselves as ego only when we're looking at other things. So when we look at other things, we're aware of ourselves as I am this body. That which is aware of itself as I am this body is ego. But if that ego, instead of looking at other things, tries to look at itself, as he says in verse 25, if we look for it, if we search for it, it runs away, because we can. Nobody has ever seen ego. Ego can never be an object of perception. If we look for ego, it disappears because there is no such thing. So we seem to be ego only so long as we're looking at other things. If we look back at ourselves, ego dissolves. And since all other things exist only in the view of ego, all other things dissolve along with it.
Yeah. So when ego identifies with the body, and the body just body and its thoughts and its emotions and its everything, it's seconds and third persons.
Yes. That is, ego always takes itself. Ego is not an object.
Exactly.
But it always takes itself to be an object. That's the significance of what Bhagavan says in verse 25. He says ego is a formless phantom. Because it's formless, it's not an object. Ego can never be an object, but it cannot seem to exist without taking itself to be an object. So as ego, we always experience ourselves as I am this body. But this body is not what ego actually is. So if instead of holding on to this body and through the five senses of this body seeing a world, if we try to hold on to ego itself, to be I, but is aware of itself as I am this body, thereby we lose our hold on this body, and ego subsides and disappears. So we need to look for ego, but we will never find ego, because in the process of looking for ego will subside. That in the process of ego looking for itself, it will subside back into its source, dissolve back into its source, and the reality that underlies ego are all mudal. The Atma Swarupa alone will remain shining. In other words, when that which is now aware of itself as I am this body tries to find the I am, this body collapses back into, the adjunct collapses back into the essence of ego, which is I am, and I am alone remains. When the body collapses, everything else collapses.
And one thing, Michael, if, Bhagavan said that the ego is a phantom, no, without form, no, or formless phantom, no?
Yes.
But the ego need a form to exist.
Yes. It always holds on to a form.
Is possible in your view that the ego, before to take a body aside, exists as a formless phantom?
No, because Bhagavan says, Urupatri undam, grasping form, it comes into existence. That means as soon as it rises, it grasps the form. So it cannot exist without grasping a form. So in its formless condition, if it remains as formless, what is formless? Only I am. So when Bhagavan says it's a formless phantom, he's implying that though ego, it's formless because it's got no form of its own. It's a phantom because it's got no substance of its own. But what it takes to be its substance, the substance means the existence and the awareness, is actually Sat-Chit. So ego is nothing other than pure awareness. We call it ego because it looks out and takes a body to be I. But if that which is now looking outside, taking a body to be I, looks inside, all other things collapse and I am alone remains. Everything implodes back into I am.
But maybe it's possible that the vasanas, that if I know well, is the first extension of the ego, no?
Yes.
Begins to create the subtle body.
Yes.
And you feel, for example, no, the sensation in the first instant of the separation, no, who am I? I feel that I miss myself, and this is the subtle body, impulse for the vasanas, impulse for the root that is the ego, and finally construction the body, physical body, as a final body of to begin the. I don't know if I'm explaining well.
That is when ego rises, the first sheath. That is, we always, when the sheaths are enumerated, we go from the gross to the subtle. We say the Annamaya kosha, that's the physical body. Subtler than that is Pranamaya kosha. Subtler than that is Manomaya kosha, the mind. Subtler than that is Vijnanamaya kosha, the intellect. Subtler than that is the Anandamaya kosha, the will, the chittam. So the subtlest of all is the Anandamaya kosha, the subtlest of the five sheaths. So as soon as ego rises, the first sheath is the Anandamaya kosha. That's the cause of everything else. That's why it's called Karana Sarira. But that consists of vasanas. So as soon as ego rises, it rises along with its vasanas, but instantaneously those vasanas sprout. And the first thing they become is intellect, then mind, then prana, then body. But though we say it in this order, it all happens simultaneously. That is, the body cannot exist without the prana. But prana cannot exist without the mind. The mind cannot exist without the intellect. The intellect cannot exist without the will, and the will cannot exist without ego, and ego cannot exist without I am. So
but we can say that the Anandamaya Kosha exists. But we can say that the Anandamaya Kosha exists firstly without the Vijnanamaya Kosha, and because you say that is simultaneously, no?
Yes.
In my field, maybe I'm mistaken, no? But in my field, the begin of the illusion is from the more subtle to the more density.
Yes, it is. That is, we have to say the more subtle comes first and the others come after. But that is not, we need to distinguish between causal sequence and temporal sequence,
yes,
chronological sequence. Chronologically, it all happens instantaneously. It all happens at the same time.
yes.
For example, in the 5th paragraph of nāṇā, Bhagavan says, he says very clearly, of all the thoughts that appear in the mind, the thought called I alone is the first thought. Only after this rises do other thoughts rise. There he says only after. Pirahe means only after. And then he emphasized the same thing in the next sentence by saying the same thing using different terms. Only after the first person appears do second and third persons appear. First person is the thought called I. Second and third persons are all the other thoughts. Without the first person, second and third persons do not exist. So if we read this, without considering other teachings of Bhagavan, it looks like first I thought rises, and after I thought has risen, other thoughts rise. That's how it seems to us. That's how what this suggests. But actually what Bhagavan has made it so clear in other places. For example, in verse 7 of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, he says, in verse 7, he uses the word arivu. Arivu means awareness. But in this context, the awareness he's referring to is ego. So he says, though the world and awareness arise and subside simultaneously, he says, he makes it clear, it's Ondrai. The Ondrai means as one. Now, simultaneously, in this context, it implies the world shines by awareness. So the cause is the awareness. The effect is the world, but they appear and disappear simultaneously. There's another place in the 7th paragraph of nāṇā. He says, he begins by saying, what actually exists is only atmasvarupa. Then in the next sentence, he says, the world, soul, and God are karpanegal. That's fabrications in it, like the illusory silver in a shell. And then he says, Ive mundrum ekakalatil tondri, ekakalatil marakindrana. These three appear simultaneously and disappear simultaneously. The word he uses for simultaneously is ekakalatil. That means at one moment. So one moment, that implies at the same moment they all appear and they all disappear. So
it's like when we fall asleep or when we wake.
Yes.
We won't forget, we don't remember the moment.
Yes. So there may seem to be a contradiction here, because here Bhagavan is saying they appear simultaneously. Whereas in 2 paragraphs earlier, in paragraph 5, he said that ego appears first. Only after ego, other things appear. The world and God appear only after ego. So why does he say in one place simultaneously? In another place, he says only after. What we need to understand is only after there is not talking about the chronological sequence or temporal sequence. In terms of time, they happen simultaneously. But in terms of causal sequence, obviously the cause comes before the effect. when we say cause comes before the effect, that doesn't mean the cause has to precede the effect in time, but in terms of cause and effect, it is the cause that causes the effect. So logically, the cause comes before the effect, even though they're simultaneous. And we can see this in worldly life. There's so many examples we can give in the world of simultaneous creation. Supposing you're driving your car and you hit a lamppost. When you hit the lamppost, the car is damaged, and the lamppost is probably also damaged. The cause for the damage is the collision. But in terms of
the event is
in terms of cause and effect, the collision must come first. Yeah. It's only after the collision that the damage takes place. But in terms of chronological sequence, in terms of time, it's simultaneous.
Yes.
So we need to distinguish causal sequence from chronological sequence. So in terms of causal sequence, the first cause is ego. From the first thing it projects is the vasanas, you see, I'm now talking not in terms of chronological sequence, but in terms of causal sequence. First, we project the vasanas. The vasanas are the seeds that give rise to the other four sheaves. The vasanas give rise to the intellect, and then to the mind, and then to prana, and finally to the body. But this all happens simultaneously. But in terms of cause and effect, it goes from the subtlest is the cause, the grossest is the effect. So it goes through the sequence of from subtle to gross, from the sequence of inward to outward. What is most inward is ego. What is most outward is the world.
So the sense of the causal sequence is that just to be aware that the most subtle is more powerful than the others.
Exactly. And
not to establish a chronological order event.
And but the grosser cannot exist without the more subtle. But paradoxically, the most subtle is ego, but ego cannot exist without the grosser. As Bhagavan says in the end of the fourth paragraph of nāṇā, he says, manam epodum or stulate anusarite nikam. The mind stands only by always attaching itself to something gross. That means a physical body. Taniyai niladu, it cannot stand alone. But though the mind depends on the body to exist, the body is an effect, the mind is the cause. The mind here means ego. So these are very simple things if we think about it, but it's also very subtle. So we need to understand, we need to think deeply about these things. So shall I come back to this this first sentence of this verse now?
Yes.
So here Bhagavan is saying that he first begins with a premise. The premise is because we see the world. Yes, we all agree we see the world. How does he infer from the fact that we see the world that the best option is to accept that there's one thing that has a power to that becomes many? The reason is there is one seer and many things seen. So the many exists in the view of the one. So from this we can infer that the underlying reality, that is, there are systems of philosophy but are pluralistic. They think there are many things exist. Many things actually exist. There are other systems of philosophy that are dualistic. They think that two things exist. The Sankhya dualism, the two things that exist in the view of Sankhya dualism is Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha means the subject. although they think there are many subjects, there are many purushas, and prakriti is all objects, not only the physical world, but also the mental world. They're all included in prakriti. So Sankhya is a subject-object dualism. There are other forms of dualism, like in Western philosophy, there's Cartesian dualism, which is mind-body dualism. That's different to subject-object dualism, because in subject-object dualism, all the other thoughts, apart from the first thought that is seeing them, are objects. So they're all part, the mind is part of prakriti, according to Sankhya, but according to Cartesian dualism, it draws a distinction between mental things and physical things. But all these mental things and physical things, they all exist in the view of one ego. So ultimately, even dualism is there's no justification for pluralism, because though there seem to be many things, those many things exist only in the view of one perceiver. Likewise, there's no justification for dualism, whether Sankhyan dualism or Cartesian dualism, because all the prakriti exists only in the view of Purusha. So how can we say prakriti exists independent of Purusha? So ultimately, there is one perceiver who's in the experience of each one of us, there is one perceiver. In the view of that one perceiver, there are many others. So we say we as if there are many of us, but actually in the experience of each one of us, there is only one. So there's one perceiver, there are many things perceived. Since the things that are perceived seem to exist only in the view of the perceiver, the most reasonable conclusion is that all those things that are seen depend for their existence on the seer of them, in whose view they exist. So since there's one perceiver, but that one perceiver is not real, because it appears and disappears. That which perceives the world is ego. That ego exists in waking and dream, it disappears in sleep. So even it isn't real. So since there's one perceiver that is unreal, there must be some reality underlying it. That underlying reality is what Bhagavan refers to here as vōrmudalai. So Bhagavan's verdict is the best option is to accept that there is one fundamental thing, one first thing. That first thing has a power, and that power becomes many. That power is mind or ego or maya, which is what sees the many things. So there is a logic behind this. There's a reason why Bhagavan says this is the best option. It's not the only option, because some people have said, some people have translated this orutalaiyē, it is accepting this is agreeable to all, or is necessary or something. It is not so. Bhagavan isn't saying this is the only view, because in the next verse, he begins by talking about different views. He said in the next verse, he says, each religion initially accepts three fundamentals. The three fundamentals are world, soul, and God. Contending only one fundamental stands as three fundamentals, or three fundamentals are always actually three fundamentals, is only so long as ego exists. That is all arguments about whether there's one fundamental or whether there are three fundamentals, or whether the one fundamental is, what seem to be three fundamentals, whether they are actually three fundamentals or whether they're actually just one fundamental. All disputes such as that are possible only so long as ego exists. That is, it's only in the view of ego, but there are there are contending possibilities. So Bhagavan isn't saying, but what he says in the first sentence, but that is the only option. He says it's the best option. That's why I translate orutalaiyē as the one best option. The reason it is the one best option is, for the reason I said, because there is all multiplicity exists in the view of one perceiver. And the one perceiver is not real because it appears and disappears. So we who see the world, we see the world only in waking and dream. The we who see the world cease to exist in sleep, and so the world ceases to exist with it. So since we are one, we who are in the perceiving the world, I who perceive the world is one, it is reasonable, and since this I is not real, because it appears and disappears, underlying it, there must be something that is more real, something from which it rises and into which it subsides. That which from which it appears and into which it disappears, logically, that the most reasonable thing is to say it is one. So Bhagavan said, yes, the best option is to say there is one fundamental. That one fundamental has a power. That power is the mind, the ego, the perceiver, but becomes many. That is, when we, in a dream, there is only one in the dream. There is that one ego that is dreaming. There's one dreamer. In the view of that one dreamer, there seem to be so many other things. But all those other things exist only in the view of the dreamer. So everything that is seen in a dream is nothing other than the dreamer. So the dreamer has become the dream. The dreamer sees itself as the dream. That is why he says that power has that power becomes many. That power is the mind or ego, which becomes many.
And this many begins inclusive with the illusion of too many egos that the only one ego creates.
Yes, all the many egos exist in the view of one ego.
Only one ego. Yes.
Yeah. When we are dreaming, we see so many other people, and if we ask the other people, do you see the world? What color is it? They say, oh, this is red, this is green, this is blue. They're seeing the world exactly like we are. So we have to, it seems to us in dream, there are so many other people seeing the dream. So long as we're dreaming, that seems to be real. When we wake up, we recognize, oh, it was all my own mental creation. So all these other people who seem to be seeing the world just as I was seeing it, were only existed in my view. So this is why we first have to collapse the multiplicity back to one perceiver. And then, because all the other perceivers, all the other seeming perceivers exist in the view of one perceiver. We all know at least there's one who perceives this world. We know only one who perceives. That is I. So, but this I who perceives is not real because it appears in waking and dream, it disappears in sleep. So there's something more fundamental than this I who sees. That more fundamental thing is what Bhagavan refers to here as vōrmudalai, the one fundamental. That one fundamental has this power called mind or ego, which sees itself as many.
So actually the three states are the proof, or the inference can be drawn
exactly
out of the three
That is why the three states is crucial to understanding this. That is because in Advaita, that is in pure Advaita. Well, I equate Bhagavan's teachings with Advaita because Bhagavan's teachings are Advaita in their purest form. So in Advaita, or in Bhagavan's teachings, we are not asked to believe anything, but is not supported by our own experience. It is our own experience, but the world appears only in waking dream. In fact, we know it's not the same world. The world that we see in waking is different from the world we see in dream. So of course, both are dreams, but they're different dream worlds. But a world exists only when we rise as ego and experience ourselves as I am this body. This is our own experience. When we don't rise as ego, when we don't experience ourselves as I am this body, as in sleep, there is no world. Therefore, it is reasonable to suppose that the world exists only in the view of ego. Because as Bhagavan said, Bhagavan used to say very simple things, but very simple but very deep things. I don't know how many people really understood what Bhagavan was saying. For example, when he said, if the world exists in your sleep, why doesn't it come and tell you that it exists? What he means thereby is, we exist in sleep, so if the world existed in sleep, why are we not aware of the world? The world seems to exist only when we take ourselves to be a body. The reason the world disappears in sleep is not because we cease to be aware, as is the normal superficial conclusion people come to. Oh, but the reason the world doesn't seem to exist in sleep is because I'm not aware. We are aware in sleep. We're aware, but we slept. So we are clearly aware in sleep, but we are aware without being aware of body or world. In other words, we haven't risen as ego. We are aware of, in sleep, what we are aware of is only I am. So in sleep, we are aware, what am I? I am only I am. In waking and dream, we're not aware of ourselves only as I am. We're aware of ourselves as I am this body. So since we are aware of ourselves in sleep without being aware of a body, who am I? I am only I. I cannot be anything other than I, because nothing other than I exists in sleep. But the I that exists in sleep is not this ego, because the ego is that which attaches itself to the body. So we can our own experience supports this. And as Bhagavan says, if we consider our experience carefully, this is the best option to conclude there is one fundamental. So when the question arises, okay, if there's one fundamental, then what are all these things? This he answers in the next sentence. What are all the things? The world is nothing but a picture of names and forms. So he said the picture of names and forms, nāmavuruc cittiramum. Cittiramum, means and. The picture of names and forms, and pārppāṉuñ, the one who sees. So we've got the picture, we've got the what is seen, and the one who sees. Where is this one seeing? Where is the one who sees seeing the picture? There must be a screen. That screen also, that is the picture, the seer, the screen. And by what light is this seer seeing? By the light of awareness. So the pervading light. So all these four, the four constituents of this perception of the world, the what is seen, the one who sees, the screen on which it is seen, and the light by which it is seen, he says, attanayam, all these nāṇāvāñ are he who is oneself. He here refers to the one fundamental. Tāṇā means who is oneself. So we ourselves are the one fundamental. We are that which appears as the picture of names and forms, as the one who sees it, as the screen on which it appears, and as the light by which it is seen. Here Bhagavan is referring to an analogy that he often gave to describe how the world seems to exist. And an analogy he often gave is the cinema. In a cinema, you've got a projector. In the projector, you've got a film reel, and light goes through the film and it projects pictures on the screen. So to see the pictures on the screen, you need a light. You also need the screen to see it on. That's why he refers here to the screen and to the pictures. So what is this screen? The screen on which we see this world is our own mind. The light by which we see the world is our own mind. That is ego. Ego is the one who sees. It is also the screen on which it sees. It is also the light by which it sees. And it is also the picture that it sees.
And the projector. So,
yes. Well, ego is, that is, the seeing is itself projecting, as I said earlier. So all these are only ego. But what is this ego? it's nothing but that one fundamental, because from where does ego rise? It rises only from I am. It cannot rise from anything other than I am. What exists in all the three states is only this fundamental awareness I am. So from this fundamental awareness I am, ego rises. And as soon as ego rises, it experiences itself as the seer. It experiences a world that is seen. So what is this world that is seen? What is the one who has seen it? What is the screen on which it is seeing this world? What is the light by which it sees this world? All these are ego, but this ego is nothing but that one fundamental. And that one fundamental is what? Tāṇā. It is, tāṇā means he who is oneself. So we ourselves are the one fundamental, but we now experience as the seer, as the picture, as the screen, and as the light.
And in the picture of names and forms is included our body.
Our body, not only our body, but that is but all the five sheaths that constitute the body. So it's not, this body is obviously an object. We can all see it. The body is an object. I can see my hands. It's all objects perceived by me. But not only that.
Our mental.
The prana, the life, all the physiological processes that animate this body, they are objects. The mind that consists of perceptions, memories, thoughts, feelings, emotions, and so on, all objects. The intellect, the judging and reasoning, and these are all experienced by us. So it's all object.
Yeah.
The vasanas, the inclination to like this, to dislike that, and everything, all are things experienced by us. So all the five sheaths are objects. They're all jada, because all objects are jada. And whatever is jada is also a sat. As Bhagavan, that's why in verse 22 of Upadesha, Bhagavan is very, very clear. He talks about these five sheaths, and he says they that is the body, the mind, the ulaham means heart, but here in this context it means the intellect. Where can mean soul or can mean life. In this context, it's referring to the prana. And irul means darkness. It's referring to the darkness of vasanas. In other words, the anandamaya kosha. So all these five, elam means all, jadam, they're non-aware, asat, non-existent, anadal. Since they are all jada and asat, satana nāṇāvāñ, they are not I who is sat. So all these things are unreal. So the I that is aware of itself as I am this body consisting of five sheaths is itself unreal. What is real is only the underlying I, the real I, the I, but the I of the I, the real I, what he referred to in the previous verse of Upadesha. Nānenum sopurul āmadu nālamai nānatratu katamundi para namadimme nikatalundi para. This is a very beautiful verse. That here adu, that is referring to the previous verse in which he says that one infinite whole that appears as I am I. He says that is always the true import of the word I, because of the exclusion of our non-existence, even in sleep, which is devoid of I. When he says sleep is devoid of I, he means the I he's referring to is ego. So sleep, there's no ego in sleep, but we don't cease to exist in sleep. Therefore, what the word I truly refers to is not ego or all the adjuncts that it takes itself to be. It's only that fundamental awareness I am. Therefore, what is the truth? Not I am this body, but only I am I.
Mm-hmm. And the term cohesive, respect the screen, is alluding that all is included in the screen.
All is held together. All is held together.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a projector and you just project out into the darkness with no wall or screen or anything, but you can't see the picture. You must have something to hold it together. The screen holds the picture together. Imagine if you have a projector and you project it just out into the darkness, where there are no walls, no trees, nothing. There's just an empty, dark space. Maybe like an empty plain with no vegetation in it, and you project, and it's dark. You project into that darkness. You can't see any picture. Only if you've got something there, if you've got a wall or a sheet or something, then only you can see the picture. So the picture is held together by the screen. So, but the word he uses is cērpaḍamu. Cēr means what is holding, or what is joining them together. So the pictures are joined together by the screen. But what is that screen? It is nothing but ego. What is the continuity through all experience? Now, for example, just for example, now we're aware of ourselves. We are maybe in our 40s or 50s or 60s or whatever. At one time, we were aware of ourselves as a 10-year-old or a 5-year-old. What is the connection between that person we took ourselves to be then and this person we take ourselves to be now? Everything has changed about this person. What was once a small boy has now become a middle-aged or old man. The things that child liked, we are no longer interested in. The things that we like now would not have interested that child. Our view of the world is quite different. Our knowledge is different. Our beliefs are different. Our memories are different. We now remember so many things, but we couldn't remember as a child because we hadn't yet experienced them. So many things have changed. What is the one continuity? It's only I. So what holds everything together, the screen on which all our diverse experiences are held together, is only ego. So ego is itself what it sees as the picture of names and forms. It is the seer. It is the screen that holds it all together. And it is the light by which it is all seen. That is not the original light. But that Bhagavan says, āroļiyu, the pervading light. But pervading the whole of this universe is pervaded by the light of our mind. In the sense that it is all known by our mind. So by what light is this world known? We can say, it's by physical light. When we turn the lights off or when the sun sets, we don't see anything because there's no light. What is it that sees the presence of physical light and the absence of physical light? What is that light that knows both the light and the absence of light? That is the light of awareness. But the light of awareness by which the world is known is not the original awareness. It's only that awareness that we call mind or ego. So that is the light that he's referring to here. The original, but that light is nothing other than the original light of pure awareness. So the ego borrows its awareness, borrows its light from its own reality, which is I am.
Mm-hmm. And Michael, it's an older analogy. I don't know if it's a valid one. The analogy of Plato's cave. You probably heard it. It's where some people are standing in the cave, looking towards the cave.
Yes.
The sun is coming from behind.
Yes.
It projects a shadow inside the cave, so they think that's reality. They think they are the shadow. So you say you have to turn back, look at the sun.
Yeah. I think Plato used that analogy. The conclusions he drew from that analogy, that is, he used that analogy to illustrate his philosophy, which is different to our philosophy, but we can use that same analogy. So long as we are sitting in the cave, looking at the pictures, we are not seeing the light. But if we turn back to find out where is the source from which the light is coming, we have to go out of the cave. And when we go out of the cave, we're then in the broad daylight. Then what we are seeing is not shadows. We are seeing what actually exists. So we can apply that in this case, so long as we are, except there, the pictures are appearing inside the cave and the light is outside. In reality, the light is inside and the pictures seem to be outside. So we who are now looking out and seeing the pictures of this world, including their thoughts and feelings and everything, because they're all included in the world in a broader sense.
It's our experience.
We need to look at the source of the light. Where is the light coming from? That is immediately the obvious light is the mind. Yes, it's by the light of the mind that we are seeing all these things. But from where? The mind is not a real light because it appears and disappears. So what is the source from which the mind gets its light? That is I am. So we need to look deep within ourselves to find the light. And once we step out into the light, or step into the light, not out into the light, when we step into the light, when we go deep into our heart, we lose ourselves in the light, and all the picture then cease to exist. They become irrelevant.
So the cinema analogy intends to recreate our experience as ego. That light projected is the original light reflected by ego to illumine all the things that are going on in the cinema.
But the thing with all analogies have their limitations. They're analogous to a certain extent, because in the case of a cinema, you have a projector and you have a perceiver. They're two different things.
Yeah, right.
But in this case, the ego is both the projector and the perceiver. And its projection and its perception are one and the same thing. It's not the projection happens and then we perceive. The perception and that is, where do we project? We project this world into our own awareness. So we are aware of the world because we projected the world into our awareness. So our awareness of the world and our projection of the world are one and the same thing.
Mm-hmm. We can say that the act or the event of the projection is occurring simultaneously and with the perception. They're the same thing.
We can say it's simultaneous, but if we think of it a bit deeper, we cannot distinguish one from the other. They are actually one and exactly the same thing.
But from the casual, non chronological view, we can say that the content of the project is before to the moment of the perception. No?
Yes. because it seems we cannot think of projection and perception. In our view, they seem to be two different things.
Yeah.
But actually, if we think deeply about it, the projection is where it's all happening only in our own awareness. So the projection and the perception are one and the same thing. It's not even that they occur simultaneously. Consider thinking. When we're thinking, we're forming thoughts in our mind. Do we first form the thought and then become aware of it? No, because we are forming the thought in our awareness. So the forming of the thought and the being aware of the thought are one and the same thing.
But it's possible that I'm not aware of a thought that is in the unconscious, no? And when I become conscious of this thought.
According to Bhagavan, there are no thoughts. Thoughts don't exist at all. Thoughts only seem to exist. In whose view do they seem to exist? Only in the view of ego. So this belief, that is particularly Freudian psychology, popularized this idea of unconscious thoughts, and this is also this idea of the unconscious is also further propagated by modern science, because they say so many things are happening in the mind but we're not aware of. But if we're not aware of them, why should we suppose they're happening? Nothing is actually happening at all. Whatever seems to be happening is happening only in our mind. So if we say there are unconscious processes, in whose view are those unconscious processes? Only in the view of the conscious ego. So actually, nothing other than I actually exists. Whatever else seems to exist, it just seems to exist. It doesn't actually exist. So even the so-called unconscious processes of the mind, they're just an idea in the mind of the ego. So there's no such thing. Nothing is happening that we are not aware of. And even what we are aware of is not really happening because it's happening only in our awareness.
Michael, does it seem to me the cinema analogy is used differently or has been used differently, like in the sense of the screen, the images are ego or what is happening, in the world, or the projection of ego, and the screen is used as the what we really are, just like that. I mean,
yes,
because I've heard it be used like this, but I think it's differently the way Bhagavan explains it.
Well, we can. Ultimately, all these things are just explanations, and there are different ways of explaining the same thing. But the purpose of all these explanations is not to make a perfectly neat philosophy. The purpose of all these explanations is to point our attention back to ourselves. So we can explain the screen as being the pure I am. In one sense, it is. But actually, covering that pure I am is ego. And it's only in the view of ego that the pictures appear. So there's the background screen, the pure I am. There's the immediate screen is ego. Because there's justification for this. See what Bhagavan says in verse 26 of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu. Ahandayun dayin anatumundahum. If ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. Ahandayin drel indru anatum. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Ahandaye yabamam. Ego itself is everything. So this here, what he describes as the picture of names and forms, the one who sees, the cohesive screen, and the pervading light, these are all ego. But what is ego? Ego is nothing but that one fundamental. So long as we're looking outwards, ego seems to be something other than that one fundamental. But if ego turns its attention back within to see who am I, it finds itself to be just that one fundamental. So ultimately, the ultimate screen is everything is ultimately just he. But the immediate screen, the immediate screen and the immediate light is ego. But behind ego lies that one fundamental. What ego actually is only that one fundamental. So it's equally true to say the screen and the light are that one fundamental, as it is just, but it's better to go through step-by-step process. That is, in the Upanishads, it said, everything is Brahman. Bhagavan says everything is ego. Is that a contradiction? No, it's not. Because if ego investigates itself, it finds it is Brahman. So if everything is ego, and ego is Brahman, then everything is Brahman. But Bhagavan always emphasizes ego. Why? Because ego is the problem. So Bhagavan, that is, he says in verse 24 of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, for example, he says, Jadu udul nāṇāvāñ, the insentient body does not say I. Satchit uḍilladu, Satchit does not rise. Uḍilladu, at the extent of a body, nāṇāvāñ, one thing I, udikum, arises, ideal, in between. So ego rises in between the body and Satchit. And arising between the body and Satchit implies also arising between the world and Satchit. So the Satchit has absolutely no connection with the body or world. The only thing that seems to connect the body and world with satchit is ego. Ego is the intermediary.
Right.
He says the same thing in the first paragraph of Vichara Sangraham. He says that there's a very very deep sentence here. He says, "Ipadi dehate kuritu." That means referring to the body in this way. Avarantaramai, being intermediate. So what he means by intermediate there, it's referring to that same idea in verse 24 of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu. What rises in between. So the intermediary between everything and satchit is only ego. So he says, referring to this body in this way, being in between, nan endru erum bodhame, the awareness that rises as I. So this awareness that rises as I refers to the body. That means it's that which identifies itself as the body, and it in between what? In between the satchit and everything else. So the ego is the intermediary, and that awareness is what is called tapboda, ahankara, ego, avidya, maya, malam, impurity, jiva, and in so many ways it's described. So Bhagavan is always focusing on this intermediary, because this intermediary is the cause for the rising of appearance of everything else. Without ego, nothing else exists. Nothing else even seems to exist. Nothing else actually exists at all. All other things that seem to exist only in the view of ego.
So at the end of the verse, when it says, all these are he who is oneself, it's not the other way around. It's not, but he, oneself, is not all these sorry. The other way around.
Yes, you're right. It's like saying the snake is the rope. But the rope is not the snake. The rope is never a snake. The rope is always only a rope. I am only I. But all these other things are nothing other than I. They cannot be anything other than myself.
Yeah.
Because in whose view do they exist? They exist only in the view of myself. And if this myself in whose view they all exist turns its attention back to see who am I, it merges back into its source, and everything else merges with it. So we rise as ego, expand as this whole universe. When we turn our attention back within and thereby merge back into our source, the whole universe collapses with us. It's actually but Bhagavan's philosophy is so simple, but also so deep and subtle. See, in this one simple little verse, how much the verse itself, the meaning is very simple. Because we see the world, accepting one fundamental that has a power that becomes many is certainly the one best option. The picture of names and forms, the one who sees the cohesive screen, the pervading light, all these are he who is oneself. That's the surface meaning. But if we look beneath the surface, there's so much more meaning there than strikes us at first. When we first read it, it looks very simple. But when we think deeply about what Bhagavan is implying here, it's so much more meaningful. But it's still very simple. It's actually what is being implied here is very, very simple, but it's very deep and very subtle.
Yeah. In the first sentence, Michael, so you translated as because we see the world, but you said the first comes the subject we, then the object,
yes,
the world, and then you say the sentence. I guess it's because of the declension of the case. It is because of by seeing, right?
Yeah, by seeing, literally.
In Tamil,
by we seeing the world.
By we seeing the world, actually. So in Tamil, it's as you explained one to me that it's it would be a present participle there. I mean, by us seeing.
No, it's not a participle. Here it's a verbal noun.
As a verbal noun. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Correct. Mm-hmm.
So, in Tamil, the normal word order in a sentence, or in a in this case it's a clause, but we could extract a sentence out of this. We see the world. The normal way of saying that in Tamil, if you're talking in Tamil prose, comes subject, object, verb. So this is following the normal prose order, but philosophically, it has much deeper significance, because why Bhagavan begins with the word we? That is all the whole problem. For whom is the problem? It is we. Who sees the world? We do. So the world is of secondary importance. The world seems to be important only because it is seen. Who sees it? We do. So we have the
problem.
But we have a problem.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, according to the word order, here we have the subject, the object, and the verb. That is the logical order in Tamil. But if we think of it philosophically, going from the gross to the subtle, because generally in Advaita, they always start from the gross. They always say, that is the 5 sheaths, for example, they enumerate from the gross to the subtle. The 5 elements, 5 elements actually, they begin usually from space. But anyway, in the case of the 5 sheaths, they always begin from the gross and go to the most subtle. That is because we're looking outwards. When we start to look in, we need to first eliminate the gross and then go in deeper and eliminate the more and more subtle, and then we come to the subtlest. So generally the order in which if we consider the triputi, we've got the seer, the seeing, and the seen. So when we are returning back to the source, we begin from the seen, from what is seen. What is seen, namely the world, couldn't be seen if there were not a means of seeing it. So there cannot be anything known without a means of knowing. So, and there couldn't be a means of knowing without a knower. So what is known depends on the means of knowing. The means of knowing and what is known both depend on the knower. This is why Bhagavan says in verse 9, when he talks about what he says in verse 9 is the triads he talks about there. The triad is this knower, the means of knowing, and what is known. So he says that the dyads and triads always exist holding on to the one. What is the one that they hold on to? Some people have mistranslated this, and they say the one with a capital O, and they're implying that it's our real nature. That is not what Bhagavan means here. Bhagavan made it very clear. What he means by the one here is ego. That is because ego is the seer. So nothing could be seen if there wasn't a means of seeing it. And there couldn't be a means of seeing without a seer. So all the dyads and triads depend on the seer. Because the dyads are the pairs of opposites. They are all things that are seen. It's only in the view of ego that there are opposites. So they all depend on ego. Then he says in the next sentence, very significantly, if one sees within the mind what is that one thing, what that one thing is, in other words, who am I? They disappear. The dyads and triads disappear. Why do they disappear? Because they depend on ego. If we look within, ego disappears, therefore everything else disappears along with it.
And first disappear the dyads and after the triputi, no?
No, first disappears ego and everything else disappears along with it. Everything, the creation of the world begins from ego. The destruction of the world begins from ego. So it's only when ego ceases to exist that everything else ceases to exist. So long as there's ego, there are dyads and triads, inevitably. Nobody has ever experienced themselves as ego without experiencing dyads and triads, because there always seem to be things other than ourselves when we rise as ego. So it's only when, so ego is the first to come and the first to go. Yes. Of course, everything else comes simultaneously and everything else disappears simultaneously. But in causal sequence, ego comes first, ego goes first.
No, I said because in your process begin to disappear the distinctions, no, between opposites, the opposite, no?
Yes.
And but no, don't disappear so easily the sense that you are the seer and what you are seeing, no?
But that is, the more we look within, the more we are withdrawing our attention from everything else. So the dyads and triads, they begin to dissolve as we go within. But why do they dissolve? Because their root, which is ego, is itself dissolving. That is, now when we're looking outwards, it's very clear to us, I am this body. I am sitting here. I'm sitting in front of this computer screen. I'm talking to you. I am very clearly this body. That is the one who is sitting here, this is me. The one who is talking, this is me. The one who is thinking what to say next, this is me. So long as we look outwards, we are firmly rooted in this body consisting of 5 sheaths. But the more we look within, the more our attention is withdrawn from these things, and so our identification with them is withdrawn. So everything dissolves along with ego. That is, to the extent to which we go within, ego thereby subsides and dissolves, and everything else dissolves with it.
And one thing, Michael, respect what we was speaking about the unconsciousness, no?
Yes.
For example, no, we can recognize that in our life, we in a concrete moment, you can think that this angle of perception of the snake disappear, no? And you can see the road.
Yes.
In a concrete ambit of your life, for example,
yes.
no?
Yes.
But after suddenly occurs some experience, and you detect that you don't see all the illusion completely, no? And reveal that you perceive part of the snake in this moment, no? I don't know nothing about this that appear after, and meanwhile I don't perceive it. It don't exist, no? From the point of view of the Bhagavan teachings, no? But I can say that along my life there are some different situations that reveal me that this exists, not exist, but because I can see it. I'm sorry because my English is not is not the best.
You mean that you became aware of something you weren't aware before?
Yes, from Bhagavan teachings, what I don't see now don't exist. Only exist what I see. No, okay. But in my daily life, I can recognize that sometimes suddenly some illusion appear, and now I detect that before I can't see it. Don't exist because I don't see, I don't saw, but I can't see it. And other person in the spiritual journey with more maturity, for example, can see that illusion as an illusion, but maybe I can't. But I can't because my maturity is not enough to detect it. I don't know if I'm explaining it.
Yeah, I understand. But one thing about we never truly see an illusion as an illusion. That is, in the mundane world, we can say, yes, I'm seeing a mirage. I know very well it's a mirage. It looks to me like water, but I know it's not water. This is where analogies break down. Analogies aren't always perfect. But in this spiritual line, either we see what is real, namely ourself, or we see other things. So long as we see other things, we see ourselves not as we actually are, we see ourselves as I am this body. So we may understand this is an illusion. Just like when we look at the mirage, we know it's not water.
For example, I'm looking the water and I say, you, Michael, here's the water. And you say, no. Yeah. No, yes, I see the water. Why you don't see the water? Maybe because you access a different level.
I would be seeing the water, but I know that it's not water. But that's why I say this analogy is not, it breaks down there, because in the case of physical illusions, sometimes we continue to see the illusion, even when we recognize it to be an illusion. We understand it to be an illusion.
Yes.
And another illusion sometimes people see, on a hot day, if you look out at the ocean, you can sometimes see ships floating above the ocean. There's the ocean here, and there's a gap, and the ship seems to be floating in the air. Many of us will have seen that, but we know very well. But though it looks like the ship is floating above, we know the ship is actually in water. It's just because of the heat, the rising of the heat creates that illusion of separation between the ship and the water. So there are so many illusions we see, but we know from experience these are illusions. So if we know there's no water in the desert and we see water, and if we firmly understand that there's no water there, if we're sure that there's no water there, even if we see water, we will not be deluded by it, because we know there's no water here. We look at our map and the map says there's no water, so we are sure. But we can't apply that is analogies we have to apply where they're analogous. We shouldn't try to extend analogy beyond that. In the case of spiritual illusion, the illusion we are under, so long as we see the world, it always seems to us to be real. We may understand, that is by our reasoning and by our experience, we may understand this is illusory, it's not real. But we see it as real. So long as we see it as real, it is in effect real for us. So we can't get rid of this illusion merely by understanding it's an illusion, because it still seems to us to be real. However much Vedanta you study, you can go on reading you can churn the vast ocean of Advaitic literature, read everything there is to be read. You can understand minutely everything that is said there, but the world still seems to be real. Even though you say, no, I believe the world is unreal. It still seems to us to be real, because why the world seems to be real? What is actually real is only ourself. Because we now experience ourselves as I am this body, the body seems to us to be real. And because the body is a part of this world, the whole world seems to be real. This is why, so long as we're dreaming, the dream world seems to be real. But as soon as we wake up, our identification with the dream body is severed. We no longer identify that dream body as I. So we immediately recognize, it was just a dream. It was just an illusion. It didn't actually exist. But while we were dreaming, we may think to ourselves, oh, this may be just a dream. These things don't happen in the waking state. No, this must be a dream. We may think to ourselves, but it still seems to us very real. We still experience it as real, even though it's only the intellect is telling us it's unreal.
Mhm.
But
Maybe
but we actually see it as real.
maybe it's best analogy, for example, not these pictures, no, that have a look and discover the 7 difference, no, between those
Yeah.
pictures. And for example, you can see the one difference that I can see,
Yeah.
and why you can see one difference that I can't see. Maybe because my level of maturity is not enough, and this not reveals that this difference doesn't exist. It exists, not for me at this moment,
Yes.
but really exists, because you that are in the best level can tell me, no?
Yes.
And it does not reveal to us that the unconsciousness, no, doesn't exist because I don't see, but is in potential.
Yes.
It exists.
The unconscious does exist as an idea in our mind.
Yes.
So that is all the, for example, in Freudian analysis, they assume there are so many unconscious thoughts, suppressed thoughts or whatever. I don't know exactly how they describe it. That is their way of explaining certain perceptible phenomena. So they see certain states of mind, and they say these states of mind are caused by unconscious memories, suppressed memories. That's just an explanation. Those unconscious memories exist only in the view of the analyst who is trying to explain the situation. So nothing exists outside our mind.
Yes.
But it is a belief also, for example, that if you have a recurring dream or nightmare, like which you see a monster like every 4 days, their explanation so is so there must be some unconscious process going on.
Yes.
That produces the dream of the monster.
Yes. But that's an explanation. For example, science tells us nowadays the most popular theory in science is that so many billion years ago, there was a Big Bang. And since the Big Bang, the universe has been expanding. That is an explanation. They may have lots of corroborating evidence, lots of evidence that seems to point to that. But it is just an idea. The Big Bang is just an idea. None of us were there to see the Big Bang. We observe the universe now, or science is observing the universe, and it comes up with a theory. It comes up with what seems to be the best explanation for all. So much data is gathered by science. And we reason about this data, how to explain all this. And what seems nowadays to be the best explanation is it all began with the Big Bang from a scientific perspective. But that Big Bang exists only in our mind. It's an explanation for all the data. Even the data but that Big Bang explains exists only within our mind. So it's all only mental. To say that anything exists outside our mind, that's something we can never know. We can believe that things exist outside our mind. We can believe there's a world existing out there, but it exists. Even when I'm not seeing it in sleep, it still exists. We can believe that, but that belief is where? It's in our own mind. And we cannot have any evidence that anything exists outside our mind, because everything is experienced by us within our mind.
All is in our mind, but maybe some content I can't see for the moment.
But that
because
even
I'm not
that,
prepared.
that
I'm not
even
with
that,
maturity for
the
that.
idea that there are things that you can't see, it's just an idea. It's just a belief.
Yes, but I can prove that in my past, I'm going discovering in the process to increase my level of maturity, some things that I didn't know before. No.
Yes. But those things when did you become ignorant of those things? You become ignorant of those things only when you come to know them.
Yes.
Because the prior ignorance doesn't exist until we know something. Only when you know something, when we learn something new. Suppose now we know about the pandemic. We know that in the end of 2019, this pandemic started spreading from China. We know that. But 3 years ago, none of us knew that. So we now know something that we didn't know. So we were previously ignorant of it. But we say we were previously ignorant of it, but we actually became ignorant. Our previous ignorance came into existence at the same time as our knowledge of it.
Yes.
That's why Bhagavan says in verse 10 of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, without ignorance, knowledge does not exist. Without knowledge, that ignorance does not exist. That is, when we say we are ignorant of something, we must know it in order to know that we were previously ignorant of it. So whatever we know now, but we didn't know previously, we say previously I was ignorant, now I know it. And we also know, but one day we're going to cease knowing that. In fact, every day when we fall asleep, we cease knowing that. And when we die, we will cease knowing it forever. So the knowledge depends on the ignorance, and the ignorance depends on the knowledge. So any particular thing that you are ignorant of, or you can't say, I am now ignorant of something, because all that you know about it it's only an idea. Supposing I say, supposing you ask me if I know about quantum mechanics, I can say, no, I'm ignorant of quantum mechanics. But I'm able to say I'm ignorant of quantum mechanics because at least I know there's something called quantum mechanics that I'm ignorant of. So my ignorance of quantum mechanics depends on my knowledge, but there is such a thing as quantum mechanics that I'm ignorant of. So ignorance and knowledge of things other than ourselves are interdependent.
Okay.
There is no such thing. But 200 years ago, nobody was ignorant of quantum mechanics because nobody knew about quantum mechanics. We became aware that we were previously ignorant of quantum mechanics only when we came to know about quantum mechanics. So the whole of the human race was ignorant of quantum mechanics just over 100 years ago. Now, at least, we may not know, most of us may not know much about quantum mechanics, but we at least know there's something called quantum mechanics that we're ignorant of. But 150 years ago, even the greatest scientists didn't know that they were ignorant of quantum mechanics. There was no such thing as ignorance of quantum mechanics because there's no such thing as quantum mechanics to be ignorant of. The quantum mechanics came into existence only when we came to know it, because quantum mechanics is nothing but a knowledge that we have of things. So Bhagavan's teachings are very, very deep. Nothing exists independent of our awareness of it.
Yes. Mike, outwardly speaking, Sir Ernesto, go ahead.
No, I absolutely agree with that. But if we know that in the process to moksha, no?
Yes.
We are discovering illusions or discovering false knowledge or discovering all that. You don't know nothing about what you will know the next year.
Yes.
But you can infer that probably, no, you will know that some attachment, for example, is an illusion.
Yes.
And that attachment, if now I'm not very conscious of the real value that I give to some attachment, maybe now I'm not real conscious about that. and for that reason, it doesn't exist for me, because I don't know what is the real value of some attach. No.
Yeah.
But maybe the next year or wherever, I will be conscious about this attachment.
For example, take Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, for example. We now each have a certain knowledge about Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu. We've read it, we've thought about it, we think we know Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu. But the more we dwell on it, the more we come to know about it, because the more we understand the underlying meaning, the implication. So we are, do we know Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, or are we ignorant of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu? We have some knowledge of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, we have some ignorance of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu. But both our knowledge of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu and our ignorance of Uڵļadu Nāṛpadu, both are equally unreal. There's something I used to say: if Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu is true, then it's unreal. If it's real, then it's untrue. Because what does Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu tell us? Everything other than I is unreal. Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu is obviously something other than I, so it's unreal. But it's still true, because what Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu tells us, but everything other than I, that is true. So none of the knowledge we have of anything other than ourselves ultimately is real. It may be true in a relative sense. Why Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu is true? Because it's pointing us in the right direction. But we cannot, you can go on studying Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu for crores of janmas, for tens of billions of lives. You will not find the almanac. There's an old saying: the almanac will tell you when it's going to rain. But however much you squeeze the almanac, you will not get a drop of water. Likewise, Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, it will point us in the right direction, but we cannot know what we actually are from Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu. Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu is, and this is true of all Bhagavan's teachings, it's true of all spiritual teachings, they are useful to the extent to which they turn our attention back to ourselves. So studying Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu is useless if we have no intention of turning our attention back to ourselves.
Yes, I can call that what we don't really know at the moment about Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu.
Yes,
is the potential knowledge to discover that Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu doesn't exist. That is solo a point.
But even the potential knowledge you have, the potential knowledge that is in Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, but the things that you may discover, the implications within Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, but you haven't yet discovered, but you may discover as time goes on. Even that is just an idea in your mind now.
Yes. Absolutely.
So it's all that is this is important thing to think about, because we need to recognize that all this is mental. That is, Bhagavan's teachings are very, very important because of the direction in which they're pointing us. They're pointing us back to ourselves. We value Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu because it's a very great aid to us in turning within. But we shouldn't be attached to Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, because one day when we die, we're going to forget Uڵḻadu Nāṛpadu. As Bhagavan says in nāṇā, a day will come when all that we know has to be forgotten. At the end of the 16th paragraph, Kattravai anaittayum orukalatil maraka vendiya varum. It will become necessary to forget all that we know. So whatever we know, whatever we learn, is useful only to the extent that it turns our attention back to ourselves. Because you can be a master of all the Upanishads, of all the Brahma Sutras, of all the commentaries. You can be the most learned pundit in the world, but it's all useless if you don't turn within. Because the whole purpose of the whole of Vedanta, the whole purpose is tattvamasi. What is tattvamasi telling us? Stop looking outside. Stop looking for that. But that what you are looking for outside, you are that. Look at yourself. That is the implication of all of Vedanta. So if we don't look at ourselves, if we don't attend to ourselves, all our learning of Vedanta, all our learning of Bhagavan's teachings is useless. So Bhagavan's teachings are very useful insofar as they direct our attention back to ourselves. Because that's the whole purpose of Bhagavan's teaching. That is the whole purpose of all of Vedanta.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why most Vedantins lose their way. Because they fail to understand the practical implication of what they're learning. That's why Bhagavan came to Bhagavan's teachings are all about practice. What is so precious about Bhagavan's teachings is how clearly and emphatically he has pointed out the practical implication of all of Vedanta. Bhagavan didn't write any commentary on any Upanishads. He didn't write a commentary on the Brahma Sutra. He didn't write a commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. He did select and translate 42 verses, but that's all. Bhagavan didn't write commentaries, but Bhagavan's teachings are the greatest commentary on the whole of Vedanta, because he's pointing out what is the practical implication. In verse 32 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, he says very beautifully, when the Vedas say you are that, instead of knowing and being that by investigating who am I, that's the implication. I'll paraphrase it. That is the meaning of the verses. I'll read it first and then I'll explain how it. The meaning of the verses. When the Vedas proclaim that is you, instead of oneself knowing oneself as what, thinking I am that, not this, is due to non-existence of strength, because that alone is always seated as oneself. So the implication of this is, but when the Vedas proclaim you are that, what should our response be? Our response should be, oh, if I am that, then what am I? That is the purpose of Tattvamasi. It's pointing our attention, which is going outward, seeking for that, is directed back towards ourselves. But that you are seeking outside, you are that. So our attention is turned back to ourselves. So as soon as the Vedas say you are that, our response should be, oh, if I'm that, then what am I? By investigating what am I, we thereby know ourselves and be ourselves. We know and be what we are. And that is the aim of it. Instead of that, if you go on thinking, I am not that, I am this. I'm not this, I'm that. I am that, I'm not this. That is due to non-existence of strength. So all these very learned scholars and pundits and Swamijis who go on for a whole lifetime giving very learned lectures on Vedanta, the vast majority of them are completely missing the point, because the Vedas are not saying you are that in order for us to philosophize about it. But when they say you are that, what is the practical implication of that? But our attention should turn back to, oh, if I am that, then what am I? We need to turn our attention back within. So this is the purpose of all of Vedanta. Bhagavan's teaching, Bhagavan came to highlight the practical implication of all of Vedanta. If we don't follow the practice, if we just go on studying Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu or any other text, that is useless if we are not putting it into practice. So the whole purpose of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu is all about practice. The whole purpose of all of Bhagavan's teachings are pointing at one thing and one thing alone. They're pointing at ourselves. They're directing our attention back towards ourselves. So this is the purpose of it. Studying Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu is very beneficial, very useful if we put it into practice. So the practice is what is all important.
So Michael, so externally speaking, or in the with the mind turned outwards, the only thing we can do is reduce the impact a little bit of the, of the sorrows and pains of the world. By having the belief that everything is predestined, or
that is, but
that can reduce a little bit, but not. We don't.
That is. There is an immediate benefit if we study Vedanta or study Bhagavan's teachings. It should at least change our outlook on life. So we are no longer, if we are firmly convinced of the truth of Vedanta, we will not be so perturbed by the external world. But that is the very fact that the Vedanta creates such an attitude of surrender in our mind itself means we are beginning to practice it. That is, self-surrender is a part of the practice. It's a key part of the practice of Vedanta. Because what does Vedanta say? You alone are real, everything else is unreal. So that should give us at least a certain degree of vairagya. We become less concerned about the world. So there is a benefit, but that benefit is because we're already to some extent at least, we're applying it in practice. If we study Vedanta and get upset with every small upset in life. If I'm busy studying Vedanta, and then a bill comes that I have to pay, and I don't have enough money to pay for it. But I think, oh no, what am I to do? How am I? Obviously, the Vedanta is making very little impact on us. But the more we really absorb Vedanta, the more we will be concerned. Okay, there's a bill to be paid. If it's God's will, it will somehow or other be paid. We are not so perturbed by these things. So that itself is the beginning of the practice. That is, that detachment, that vairagya is a part of the practice. But that's, so long as we're still allowing our attention to go outwards, our practice is still at a very superficial level. The true practice of Vedanta is turning the mind within. Who am I? That is what Vedanta is all about. Why do the Vedas say you are that? In order to prompt us to investigate, then who am I?
And finally not seeing the world anymore. So
yes.
Circle,
yeah.
Well, I don't know if you want to add anything else.
I think we've
heard, the person from different angles. Yeah.
But this shows just one verse how much there is we can talk about it.
Right. Yeah.
One thing, Michael, do you know Michael Langford?
I know of him. I've never met him, but we've corresponded sometimes. A few times.
And what he wrote, do you think that is aligned with Bhagavan's teachings absolutely, or?
Definitely not absolutely. In some respects, yes. But he had some strange ideas. I remember at one time there was one page on his website where he had graded different teachings. And Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu came very low down on the scale. So, I don't think he hasn't gone deep into Bhagavan's teachings. He's read a little and he's got certain fixed ideas, awareness or watching awareness. But I don't think he has such a deep understanding.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much.
Some of the things he says, they're okay, but he's trying to point in the right direction. But on many of the deeper aspects of Bhagavan's teachings, I don't think he's got a very deep or subtle understanding.
Mm-hmm.
But at least he's emphasizing practice. But the trouble is he explains the practice as awareness, watching awareness, which is, why not I watching I? As soon as we talk of awareness, we get into it's potentially we have awareness about so many things. I've got awareness, but there's a crisis brewing on the borders of Ukraine. So I have awareness of that. Are you aware of that? Yes, you have awareness of it also. So when we say awareness, watching awareness, awareness of what? So awareness is a word but means different things in different contexts. We should do more to raise awareness of women's rights, for example. When we talk about raising awareness, is that the awareness we are to attend to? No, the awareness we are to attend to is that awareness that we always know as I, the fundamental awareness. So why not just say I watching I, rather than awareness watching awareness? Because awareness watching awareness, yes, I is awareness in its purest form. The fundamental awareness is that awareness I am. But awareness can mean so many things in so many different contexts. So why not? It's much simpler, but that's why Bhagavan, he focused so much on I, on ourself. He did say, what is I? I is only awareness, Bhagavan said, but he's directing our attention back to I. Because otherwise, if you talk about awareness, people often don't understand. They say everything is awareness. Then we can attend to everything by that definition. If awareness has to watch awareness, and if everything is awareness, then we can watch anything, and we're watching awareness. So it's all. That's why it's not. When we study Bhagavan's teachings, we have to go beyond the words. We have to understand what lies beneath the words, what lies behind the words, because words can mean different things in different contexts. The same people will understand different things from the same words. Yes. So Bhagavan knew very well the limitation of language. That's why he said the ultimate teaching is silence. But if we the words Bhagavan has used are as practical as can be. That is why who am I? He's pointing us back to investigate I. But even who am I, people understand, they misunderstand. Oh, Bhagavan said to ask who am I, so who am I? Who am I? They misunderstand. The purpose of the question, who am I, is to direct our attention back to look within to see who am I. It's not to ask who am I or to repeat who am I. It is to see who am I, to investigate and see what we actually are.
And the question makes sense in the frame of the teachings, not only just out of context. Who am I? And
yes.
You can be misleaded.
So we need to. That is Bhagavan's teachings are very, very valuable. They point us in the right direction, but we have to. They point us in the right direction to the extent to which we understand them correctly. That's why studying works like Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu is so valuable. Because then we are coming to see what is behind the word, what is Bhagavan pointing at, what is the implication of what he's saying. So awareness watching awareness, it's not an incorrect way of saying it, but it's not necessarily the best way of saying it, because what people understand by the word awareness, people can understand different things. But one thing, we all know I. So let's point our attention towards I. I means not anything that we take ourselves to be, not this body, not this mind, but now seem to be I. But what am I? What am I actually?
Yes, because you can say you're conscious or awareness of awareness, and this implies that this awareness is a mixed awareness, no, of Chittabhasa, for example, no?
Exactly.
And now you are making the yes. What was surprise for me is in his book Manonasa, the subtitle said that the autobiography of the liberation, no?
What does it say? What does it say?
Michael Lanford has a book whose title is Manonasa, and the subtitle is the autobiography of the liberation. No?
So Brahman has written its autobiography, because when there's Manonasa, only Brahman remains.
Right.
But Brahman's autobiography won't be very interesting because it has got nothing to say about itself. All Brahman can tell us is, I am I.